Have you ever found yourself staring into the darkness, a quiet moment late at night, and wondered what secrets history has tried to forget? What truths were so profound, so earth-shattering that they were deliberately buried under millennia of stories, myths, and legends? What if I told you that the greatest story never fully told isn't about a war between nations, but a war for the very soul of creation? And that the key to unlocking it lies not with the famous heroes or the infamous villains, but with a group of women whose choices brought heaven crashing down to earth. We often hear about the Great Flood, a cataclysm sent to wash the world clean of wickedness. We hear whispers of the Nephilim, the giants who walked the earth, born of an unholy union. But the story always seems to stop there, as if the waters washed away all the questions. But they didn't. The real horror, the deepest, most haunting secret, isn't about how the giants were destroyed. It's about what happened after. It's about the fate of the women who bore them. These were not ordinary women. They were the ones who chose desire over divinity, passion over piety. They dared to love beings of light who had fallen from grace, angels who had forsaken their sacred duty for a taste of mortal existence. And for that love, for that single universe-altering choice, they were handed a punishment so unique, so poetically cruel, that it has been hidden in plain sight ever since, masquerading as folklore. A consequence so severe that only one being in all of creation could be entrusted to carry it out. The Archangel Michael, the commander of heaven's armies, the very sword of God's justice. But here is the part that will send a shiver down your spine. Michael's judgment didn't end with the fallen angels. He turned his divine, unflinching gaze upon their human wives. What he did next didn't just punish them, it transformed them, branding their very souls and echoing their sorrow through the ages. Do their spirits still call to us from the depths? Do they exist now as the alluring, mournful sirens of legend, whose songs are woven from grief and fury? Tonight, we pull back that veil. We dive deep into the waters of forgotten history to uncover a truth that will forever change the way you look at the world, at mythology, and at the thin line between love and ruin. But before we journey into that abyss, I want you to do something for me. Take a look around. In the comments below, tell me what city you're in and what time it is for you right now. I want to feel the global community of truth seekers we are building here, all of us connected in this moment, ready to explore the unknown together. Your presence, your energy, it fuels our quest to illuminate what has been kept in the shadows. Stay with us, because as we go deeper, the story only gets more shocking. What the Archangel Michael did was more than a punishment. It was a prophecy. And once you hear it, you will never listen to the sound of the ocean the same way again. Are you ready to step into the darkness? Let's begin. Have you ever heard the saying that a single glance can alter a destiny? A fleeting moment, a lock of the eyes, and the entire trajectory of a life can be irrevocably changed. Now, what if I told you that one such glance, not from a man, but from the most powerful celestial beings in existence, was enough to shatter the divine order and set in motion a tragedy of cosmic proportions? This is not merely a tale of forbidden love. It is the story of the most catastrophic case of love at first sight ever recorded. An event so profound it shook the very balance between heaven and earth. In the celestial realm, in the timeless expanse of heaven, all was purity, order, and radiant light. The angels, God's divine messengers and warriors, moved in perfect harmony, fulfilling their sacred duties. They were the choristers of creation, their voices rising in hymns of holy praise. They were the maintainers of cosmic beauty, tending to the stars and galaxies. And they were the sentinels, the stoic guards of divine law. They were fashioned from light and sound, created to serve and obey, their wills perfectly aligned with the will of the Almighty. They knew no selfish desire, no personal ambition beyond the glorious task set before them. Their mission was clear, their loyalty absolute, their existence a seamless song of devotion. But then something shifted, a flicker in the grand, unchanging symphony. On a day that began like any other, as they performed their celestial watch, their gaze drifted downward. Down from the Empyrean heights, past the swirling nebulae and nascent stars, to the small blue-green orb of Earth. And what they saw there was not the chaos or sin they might have expected, at least not yet. What they saw was beauty, but it was a kind of beauty entirely alien to them. It was not the flawless, static perfection of the divine, nor the awesome, predictable glory of the cosmos. It was human beauty, imperfect, fragile, raw, and achingly real, and it captivated them. The daughters of men, with their untamed emotions, their gentle strength, and their ephemeral mortal charm, stirred something deep within the angelic hosts, a resonance that had never been awakened before. It was a feeling for which they had no name, no context. How could beings forged in pure light and holiness begin to covet flesh and fragility? What was it about these mortal women that could make angels, immortal, wise, and surrounded by the splendor of God, feel a pull so strong they would consider abandoning everything they were created to be? The book of Genesis, chapter 6, verse 2, records this pivotal moment when the sacred boundary was breached. The sons of God saw that the daughters of human beings were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. This moment, this first lingering look, was the beginning of the fall. It was the spark that would ignite a firestorm of rebellion, corruption, and ultimately divine judgment. But the deeper, more haunting question remains. If even the angels could fall for the allure of desire, what does that say about the profound power of human connection and the perilous dangers of loving outside the will of God? This is where the story takes its dramatic and dangerous turn. The angels, beings who were meant to be immune to the temptations of the material world, began to experience something utterly foreign, something overwhelmingly potent. It began as a subtle fascination, a whisper on the celestial winds. But with each stolen glance at the world below, that whisper grew louder, transforming into a chorus, a siren call they could not silence. What was this strange magnetism they felt? Why did it awaken such a longing in beings designed to exist above and beyond desire? It was no longer mere admiration. It was becoming a craving, an obsession, a fire kindling in hearts that were never meant to burn with earthly passion. These were not minor angels. The texts refer to them as the sons of God, the watchers of heaven, the guardians of divine order. Yet with every downward look, the pristine boundaries of their heavenly existence blurred a little more. The luminous aura that once radiated from them, pure and unwavering, began to flicker. Their glory, which was meant to be a reflection of God's own holiness, started to dim as forbidden thoughts crept into their immortal minds. Meanwhile, on the earth below, the women went about their lives, blissfully unaware of the cosmic drama unfolding above them. They baked bread, they sang songs, they tended their fields, and they told stories around their fires, with no idea that their simple beauty, their laughter, and their warmth had become the catalyst for the downfall of the sky's sentinels. These women, in their simple, profound humanity, had unwittingly become the epicenter of a divine rebellion. Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to be watched, not by a human admirer, but by a celestial being? To be the object of a gaze from an angel, a being created to protect, who now longed to possess. What happens when the holy watchers break their silence, not to defend, but to pursue? As it is written in Jude 1:6, and the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. The celestial realm grew uneasy. The very air of heaven became charged with a tense, expectant energy. A choice was about to be made, a choice that would send ripples out into the farthest reaches of eternity. And as the angels drew closer to the world of flesh, the skies above began to change. But this strange energy wasn't just felt in heaven. Down on earth, something began to stir within the women as well, a feeling they couldn't quite name or explain. It wasn't fear, but it wasn't precisely peace either. It was as if they could feel invisible eyes upon them, not with malice, but with an intensity that was both flattering and unsettling. They felt singled out, chosen, though they did not know for what or by whom. Suddenly, their ordinary days felt extraordinary. The wind that brushed against their skin seemed to carry a strange electricity, and even the silence of the night seemed to whisper secrets just beyond their hearing. Have you ever stood outside in the moments just before a great storm hits? That eerie calm when the wind dies down and the air becomes electric, charged with tension and mystery. That was the atmosphere of these women's lives. Every heartbeat seemed to pound a little harder. Every glance over their shoulder felt a little more urgent. The sky looked the same, yet there was something in it that signaled a monumental shift was coming. Not just in the clouds, but in the very fabric of their world. They didn't realize that their mere presence had become the focal point of a spiritual war. Their smiles, their laughter, their grace. It was pulling angels down from their glorious heights. The invisible barrier between the eternal and the mortal realms was growing perilously thin, and deep within them, some primal intuition knew that the life they had always known was on the precipice of a transformation so profound it would rewrite reality itself. Was it destiny? Was it temptation? Or had they, without knowing, become players in a story written long before they were ever born? Ecclesiastes 3:1 reminds us, "To everything there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven." But what happens when celestial beings try to force a season that God never intended? The whole world seemed to be holding its breath. The animals grew restless. The wind carried a low hum, as if creation itself was bracing for a collision it could not prevent. And the women continued on, unaware that a dark, divine, and irreversible fate had already arrived at their doorstep. The angels were fully conscious that they were treading a perilous path, a road lit not by holy fire but by the flames of rebellion. They knew the boundary they were approaching was not just forbidden, it was sacred. They had been created as divine messengers, as warriors of light, sworn to serve the will of the Most High. Every fiber of their being was tuned to obedience, praise, and purity. But something had fractured. The more they gazed upon the earth, the more they hesitated in their duties, the more they dreamed of what they were never meant to desire. With each passing celestial cycle, the thought of leaving heaven took root in their minds. A wave of guilt washed over them. They remembered the celestial courts, the glory of God's throne, and the honor of carrying His light. But then another thought would rise, stronger, more seductive. What if there was more? What if humanity wasn't just a lower creation, but a doorway to a kind of experience that angels could never taste unless they crossed the line? Questions that were once unthinkable now echoed in their celestial consciousness. What would it be like to love with the consuming depth of a human heart? To feel the warmth of mortal touch, the exquisite agony of intertwined joy and sorrow? To finally understand what it felt like to be truly known, not as a servant, but as a beloved. Their hearts, once filled only with the pure light of God's presence, began to carry the shadows of their own longing. Could a celestial being love something more than God? Could a heart designed for divine worship be warped toward earthly pleasure? The scriptures give us a chilling reminder in Isaiah 14:12-14, where Lucifer himself declares, "I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High." Desires outside of God's will are the very seed from which all rebellion grows. And so the angels stood on the precipice, torn between who they were made to be and who they secretly yearned to become. The pull was no longer just a feeling, it was a force, a spiritual gravity, threatening to drag them down from the heavens forever. Day by day, the pull grew stronger, and day by day, more of the angelic host found themselves unable to resist the growing allure of humanity. What began as a silent curiosity evolved into a secret assembly. One by one, they began to gather, watching the world below not out of duty, but out of desire. What they saw mesmerized them: the laughter around a fire, the tenderness of an embrace, the tears shed under a silent moon. These were the textures of an existence they had observed but never known. And with every sunrise, their resolve began to crumble. They had been present at the dawn of creation. They had watched God speak galaxies into existence and spin stars into being like dust. They had sung as the oceans were formed and the mountains were raised. But now all of that cosmic glory was beginning to fade in their hearts, overshadowed by a longing they could no longer control. Each angel stood at a crossroads. Should they remain loyal to their divine commission or surrender to the promise of a love they could never truly possess in their current form? What is it that makes the forbidden so irresistibly attractive? Is it that the very boundaries God sets are the ones that test the deepest truths of our hearts? Heaven and earth were never meant to mingle in this way. The realms were designed to remain separate, each with its own laws and its own purpose. But the angels were now ready to trade everything they had ever been: celestial warriors, eternal messengers, servants of the Most High, for a fleeting chance at mortal love. Did they understand the cost? This was not a minor decision. This was not an act of simple curiosity. This was an act of cosmic treason. The Book of Enoch tells the story that 200 of these angels gathered together, led by one named Samyaza, and they made a pact. They swore a binding oath, sealed by both fear and desire, that they would descend to earth together so that no single one of them would have to face the judgment alone. But judgment was inevitable. Their choice would not only change their own destiny, it would alter the world. It would give birth to giants, to destruction, to a rise in wickedness so profound that God himself would grieve over his own creation. As Genesis 6:5 states, "The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time." The heavens were about to shake. The earth was about to groan under the weight of corruption. And those angels, captivated by human beauty, were about to learn a truth that echoes through eternity. No matter how beautiful the reason may seem, some divine laws are never meant to be broken. The moment these angels, no longer messengers of God, but now celestial outcasts, set foot upon the earth, a strange enchantment spread through the natural world. But this was not the kind of magic that brings healing or hope. This was something far more perilous. It was the kind of beauty that doesn't lift you up, but pulls you down like a powerful undertow. Picture the most beautiful human being you have ever seen. Now imagine that beauty magnified 1,000 times, more radiant, more perfect, more otherworldly. That is what they looked like. But their beauty wasn't just visual, it was supernatural. They did not walk as men walk. They moved as if gravity had a weaker hold on them, gliding through the air with an impossible grace. Their voices were not like human voices. When they spoke, it wasn't just words, it was melody. A sound so pure and captivating, it resonated not just in the ears, but in the soul. And the light, they didn't just reflect it, they seemed to wear it. Their presence made everything around them seem dull and faded in comparison. The flowers seemed to lean toward them, the birds fell silent, the very air around them seemed to shimmer. When they walked into a village, time itself seemed to slow down. Farmers dropped their tools, mothers paused mid-sentence, children forgot their games. Every eye was drawn irresistibly to these luminous figures. To look at them was like staring into a sun so brilliant it was almost painful, yet no one could turn away. The women who saw them felt something awaken deep inside, an ache, a hunger, a nameless fire. This was not ordinary attraction, it felt like fate or a spell. What would you do if a being from beyond your comprehension walked into your life and made you feel as if you were the only person in the universe? Could you resist? Would you even want to? These weren't just striking strangers. They were perfection. Perfection wrapped in mystery, walking among mortals like living dreams. Their skin seemed to glow with a light like silver under the moon. Their eyes held the shimmer of starlight, but seemed to hold knowledge older than the earth itself. And when they smiled, hearts melted, but something inside also stirred with unease, because behind that divine smile something felt wrong. They were beautiful, yes, but their beauty was tinged with shadow. Their charm felt too smooth, too perfect. The Bible warns us in 2 Corinthians 11:14, "For Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light." And if the Prince of Darkness can appear beautiful, how much more deceptive could these fallen beings be? Their smiles, however captivating, hid ancient secrets. Their eyes, however mesmerizing, carried the weight of a heavenly rebellion and the coldness of a loveless immortality. The women they approached felt drawn like moths to a flame, caught between awe and helplessness. How could they possibly resist someone who shone with celestial light? Someone who seemed to understand their thoughts, their fears, their deepest longings without a single word being spoken. Someone who offered them not just attention, but promises. Impossible, intoxicating promises that no mortal man could ever match. But deep down, the world itself seemed to flinch. Nature knew, heaven knew, and soon, even the women who loved them would learn that this was no fairy tale. This was the beginning of something dark, something heaven would not let stand. But this is where the truly soul-shattering part of the story begins. The terror wasn't just in what the angels did, it was in what began to happen to the women. The longer they spent in the presence of these fallen beings, the more they began to change. At first, it was subtle, a strange light in their eyes, a shift in their energy. They began to carry a presence that others could feel but couldn't explain. It was as if the divinity the angels had once held was beginning to seep into them, altering them physically, mentally, and spiritually. They no longer saw the world in the same way. The ordinary life that had once brought them comfort and meaning now seemed empty and dull. The touch of a mortal husband, the rhythm of an earthly routine, nothing could satisfy them anymore. They had tasted something forbidden, and they were now forever changed. Normal men seemed small, mundane. Their eyes, once open to simple joys, were now fixed on something far more dazzling and far more dangerous. Was this love, or was it possession? Were these women truly chosen, or were they merely used? The fallen angels knew exactly what they were doing. They did not choose at random. From their perch in the heavens, they had marked the ones they desired, the most radiant, the most charismatic, the ones whose spirits shone brightly even in the dimness of the fallen earth. And when they arrived, they used all of their power, their divine knowledge, their otherworldly charm, their illusion of perfect love to become everything these women had ever dreamed of. They whispered promises that only an angel could know. They became the embodiment of fantasy. But what looked like a dream was in fact the opening act of a nightmare. It looked like romance. It felt like destiny. But in reality, it was a sacred violation. Every time one of these celestial rebels took a woman as his wife, the very fabric of the cosmos shuddered. Heaven felt the trespass. The earth felt the consequence. These were not mere marriages. They were unholy covenants, unions forged without God's blessing, built on a foundation of disobedience and lust. And the consequences would ripple far beyond what anyone could see. Genesis 6:4 gives us a chilling glimpse. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. But what kind of heroes were they? Were they saviors or were they monsters? Because the real horror was yet to come. The children born of these forbidden unions were anything but normal. They were giants, demigods, beings of such power that no man could control them, and no angel could redeem them. These children, half angel and half human, would turn the world into a place of chaos and terror. And the question still hangs in the air: what happens when the divine crosses a sacred line? When love becomes lust and a blessing becomes a curse? The answer lies in the next chapter of the story, where these children, the Nephilim, rise from the wombs of mortal women and unleash a darkness upon the world that even heaven can no longer ignore. Now, let me unveil the terrifying truth of the offspring from these forbidden unions, the Nephilim. These were no ordinary children. They were the cursed product of angelic rebellion and human frailty. From the moment they drew their first breath, it was terrifyingly clear that they belonged to neither world. They were too large for any cradle, too strong for any swaddling clothes, and their growth was relentless. Their bodies were infused with a power that was matched only by their equally insatiable hunger. Imagine a child conceived from divine might and human flesh. A creature whose growth rate didn't just slow down, but accelerated with time. These were not just large children. They became giants who towered over trees, their shadows swallowing entire city streets. When a Nephilim walked, the very ground trembled beneath their colossal feet. When they cried, the sound was like thunder rolling through the hills. When they screamed in a fit of rage, it could be heard for miles, a sound that struck primal fear into the hearts of all who heard it. Their strength was monstrous, powerful enough to tear down stone walls, uproot entire forests, and crush armies with terrifying ease. But their physical power was only half the danger. These giants inherited the celestial abilities of their fathers, the strength, the perception, the raw power, but with none of the divine restraint. And from their mothers they inherited human emotions, the jealousy, the pride, the anger, but with no human conscience to temper them. Imagine the emotional tantrum of a toddler. Now imagine that toddler is the size of a building and has the strength to level a city. This was not a fantasy, it was a waking nightmare. The world was suddenly inhabited by beings too powerful to control and too immature to understand mercy. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live in constant fear, not of storms or wild beasts, but of your neighbor's children? Entire cities lived in terror of the Nephilim. People whispered their names with trembling lips, hoping not to attract their attention. Farmers abandoned their fields. Fishermen stopped going to sea. Markets closed down. No one wanted to be seen when the giants came stomping through. And the Nephilim came often. They took what they wanted without apology. They consumed everything in their sight: crops, livestock, and eventually, even people. Nothing was sacred, nothing was safe. Some grew as tall as towers, others as wide as city gates. But what was worse, they were not mindless brutes. They were intelligent. They could speak, reason, and scheme, and their cunning was matched only by their cruelty. The Book of Enoch paints a chilling picture of this era, stating, "And they consumed all the acquisitions of men, and when men could no longer sustain them, the giants turned against them and devoured mankind." It was not just destruction, it was a slow, terrifying, unfolding judgment. The Nephilim were not just a threat to villages, they were a threat to the balance of creation itself. Heaven watched in sorrow, the earth groaned under their weight, and God began to prepare his response, for something this unnatural could not be allowed to stand. High upon his throne of eternity, God looked down upon the earth he had once called very good. But now that good creation was unraveling. The harmony he had spoken into existence was being drowned out by the sounds of fear and bloodshed. What he had made with his hands was now being crushed under the feet of giants who should never have existed. The Nephilim, the cursed children of rebellion, had turned the earth into a battleground of darkness and sorrow. And the ones who suffered most were the very people into whom God had breathed life, his beloved humanity. Every day, the cries of the innocent rose to the heavens like smoke. Mothers hid their children, villagers fled their homes. Prayers were whispered through tears, asking if anyone was coming. asking if heaven even cared anymore. And God heard every cry. He saw every injustice. The giants thought themselves unstoppable, but the Creator was not blind. His anger, though slow to rise, began to burn like a righteous fire. A judgment was coming. It was then that heaven's mightiest warriors prepared to descend. The archangels, beings of immense power and unwavering loyalty, were summoned for battle. Michael the commander, Gabriel the messenger, Uriel the flame of truth, and Raphael the healer became warriors. These were not just serene celestial figures of peace. They were generals forged in the fire of divine justice. But even they knew this battle would be unlike any they had fought before. They were not just facing demons or fallen spirits. They were fighting against creatures born with angelic blood, hybrids of heaven and earth, filled with power, fueled by chaos, and sheathed in flesh. And they were everywhere. The Nephilim had not just been scattered, they had multiplied. They had claimed dominion. The earth had become their playground, and humanity their prey. Not even the mightiest of heaven could single-handedly stop what had grown so far out of control. The angels marshaled their forces, brilliant legions stretching across the sky. But they did not move quickly. This was not a battle they could rush into blindly. Every move was planned, every strike calculated. They had to fight not just with strength, but with the wisdom of heaven itself. The Nephilim were cunning, they were fast, and they were furious. But here's the thing about serving the Most High. When you go to war in His name, you are never unprepared. For every rebellion, heaven had a response. For every corrupted being, there was a purifying fire. And for every shadow that rose, God already had a plan to bring it down. Do you remember what Romans 12:19 says? "Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord." This wasn't just a mission, this was a divine reckoning, and leading the charge was Michael. He didn't just carry a sword, he carried the full weight of God's justice in his hand. As even the angels, the towering warriors of heaven, began to struggle against the raw power of the Nephilim, the sky itself seemed to grow still. It was in that moment that God, in His divine mercy and fierce justice, chose to act. He would not let corruption swallow His creation whole. He would not let the earth that was meant to be a garden of life become a graveyard of terror. And so the decision was made not just to attack, but to cleanse. God revealed a plan unlike anything the world had ever known. It would not be carried out by sword alone, but by the very hand of nature. A flood, great, terrible, and divine, would rise from the deep and fall from the heavens. It would wash away everything that had been tainted, not in anger, but in grief. Not just to destroy, but to begin again. Genesis 6:13 echoes this solemn moment. "The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth." And so it began. The battle erupted as a prelude to a divine storm. The archangels clashed with the giants on fields drenched in the first rains. Swords forged in heaven met fists the size of boulders. The sky itself became a war zone. Lightning tore through the clouds. Thunder boomed like the very voice of God, a percussive judgment rolling across the land. Mountains shook. Forests burst into flame from celestial impacts. The Nephilim, so accustomed to their dominance, now trembled as they faced a fury they never believed would come for them. And then the rain fell. Not a gentle shower, not even a thunderstorm. This was something else entirely. The sky ripped open with a roar. Water poured down like liquid judgment. Rivers burst their banks in seconds. Valleys disappeared beneath rising waves. The ground itself cracked and groaned. The flood was not just water, it was God's sorrow. His final verdict on a world that had lost its way. For the first time since their unnatural birth, the Nephilim felt something new, something alien and paralyzing. Fear. It was etched on their massive faces. It echoed in their roars. The beings who had once terrorized the world were now begging for a mercy they had never shown anyone else. But the season for mercy had come and gone. What happens when even the giants are brought to their knees, when the patience of God runs out, when God himself declares no more? In that moment, everyone, angel, human, and Nephilim, knew that a sacred line had been crossed. A boundary that was never meant to be touched had been broken, and now all of creation would pay the price. This wasn't just the end of an era, it was the start of something new. But first, everything unclean had to be washed away. Have you ever seen storm clouds so thick and dark they seem to swallow the sun? Now imagine that darkness multiplied 1,000,000 times over, so dense that day becomes night, not by the turning of the planet, but by the turning of a divine wrath. That is how it began, the day God declared enough. The sky didn't just darken, it turned black, the kind of black that felt alive, pressing down on everything below it. The air grew thick with a terrible silence, a pressure so heavy it felt as though the earth itself was holding its breath. At first, there was confusion. Rain was not unusual. Storms came and went, but this was different. The clouds didn't move, they hung, brooding. The wind didn't blow, it screamed. And then the rain came, not soft, not cleansing. These were not the drops that nurtured life into the crops. These were the tears of heaven, thick, heavy, and full of sorrow and anger. They didn't fall, they hammered down like mallets from on high, a drumbeat signaling the arrival of Judgment Day. Hour after hour, day after day, the rain never stopped. It didn't let up, it didn't soften, it poured as if with a purpose. And it did. The purpose was to purify, to erase, to reset a world that had gone too far. Even the mighty Nephilim, the terror of nations, the nightmare of humanity, began to panic. Their arrogance melted into confusion. Their boisterous laughter faded into a stunned silence. The giants who had once torn trees down with their fists and broken bones with their roars now shivered like lost children. They tried to escape. They ran for the mountains, scrambling up the highest peaks they could find, their massive hands clawing at the rock like desperate beasts. But the water just kept rising higher and higher until the mountaintops disappeared beneath the waves like everything else. For the first time, their power meant nothing. Strength could not stop the flood. Height could not save them. Intelligence could not outwit it. The very creation they had mocked, the rain, the rivers, the sea, was now rising up in obedience to the voice of its creator. Can you imagine the sound? The screams of men, women, and children, the guttural cries of the Nephilim, the helpless sobs of those who had laughed at Noah, who had scoffed at the warning, now crying out for a mercy whose door had been slammed shut. And the fallen angels, the once glorious beings who had caused this destruction, watched it all unfold, trapped between heaven and earth, powerless to stop what they had started. Their children, their pride, their legacy, drowning, their rebellion, once so bold and beautiful in their eyes, now shattered beneath waves that no wing could lift, no magic could soothe. This was not just rain, this was a divine reckoning. As it is written in Genesis 7:11-12, all the fountains of the great deep were broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. The waters rose, but they did not just drown. They silenced, they cleansed, they mourned. And in that terrible silence, one truth echoed louder than any thunder. When God moves in judgment, no power in heaven or on earth can stand against him. Amidst the screaming winds and thundering skies, as the earth sank beneath the weight of divine judgment, there was one vessel that was not destroyed, the ark. It floated like a single flickering candle in a world of darkness, a lone survivor on a sea of grief. Inside, Noah and his family huddled with the animals, every heartbeat echoing the sound of the crashing waves. Imagine the feeling of being inside those wooden walls, knowing that just outside the entire world was being torn apart. The ark groaned and swayed as the waters lifted it higher and higher. The storm did not whisper, it roared, shaking the very foundations of creation. But in the midst of the chaos, the ark held firm, because this was not just a boat, it was a covenant, a physical symbol of God's faithfulness to the few who remained righteous. But even inside that sanctuary, they were not deaf. The cries of the dying pierced the curtain of rain, the desperate screams of those who pounded on the outside of the ark, begging for entry. Parents calling for their children, friends crying out for forgiveness. But the door, which had been closed by God himself, did not open. Genesis 7:16 reminds us, "Then the Lord shut him in." This was not Noah's choice. It was God's decree, and they had to trust in it no matter how it broke their hearts. Outside, the water was merciless, the fields vanished, the forests disappeared. The hills became fleeting islands before they too were swallowed. The highest mountains, once symbols of majesty, sank beneath the waves as if they had never been. And the mighty Nephilim, the giants who once made the ground shake with every step, found themselves utterly helpless. Their strength was now meaningless. Their height could not save them. The flood respected no power, no pride. They tried to fight it, they climbed, they roared, they resisted. But the waves were relentless, and soon even the greatest of them disappeared beneath the surface like shadows fading in the night. And the fallen angels, the ones who had defied heaven for love and lust, could do nothing but watch. Chained, restrained by the very God they had betrayed, they saw their own legacy, their wives, their monstrous children, the cities they had helped create with forbidden knowledge, all of it collapsing into silence beneath the deluge. It was more than loss. It was erasure. Their rebellion, once so glorious in their own eyes, had become their undoing. For 40 days and 40 nights, the rain was unceasing, as if heaven itself was weeping, not just in anger, but in grief. The earth, once teeming with life, was now a single, endless ocean. No mountains, no valleys, no proud towers, just water stretching to the farthest horizon. And in the heart of that vastness, a single vessel floated on, Noah's Ark, the last heartbeat of the old world. When the waters finally began to recede, it was like watching the earth awaken from a terrible dream. But it was not the same earth. The world had been wiped clean. There was nothing left of the Nephilim's reign. No temples, no bones, no trace of the hybrid race that had once ruled like gods. It was as if time itself had been reset. A new beginning had come, but not for everyone. Because while the ark had survived and the earth would live again, the story was not over. There was still one group left to face judgment, a punishment that was not of drowning, but of an eternal haunting. The wives of the fallen angels, the women who had embraced the forbidden and given birth to the giants. They had survived the flood, but not in the way they might have hoped. What awaited them next was darker than death, and the Archangel Michael was on his way. As the last of the floodwaters receded and the sun once more touched the face of the earth, many thought the terror was over, but for some the nightmare was just beginning. Hidden in the silence of the cleansed world were hearts still shackled by regret. The women who had loved the fallen angels. They had survived the deluge, but perhaps survival wasn't a mercy. Perhaps it was the start of their judgment. Imagine it, to have loved someone with all your soul, someone so radiant, someone who once shone brighter than the stars. These women had given themselves to beings of divine beauty and unimaginable power. They believed it was love. They believed it was destiny. But in the end, it was a deception wrapped in splendor. And now those angel husbands, the ones they had adored, were gone. Not dead, but worse, imprisoned in chains of darkness. Some were cast into the deep pits, as described in 2 Peter 2:4. For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved for judgment. Others were sealed away in spiritual realms, trapped until the final day of judgment. They could not return, could not speak, could not even offer a final touch of comfort. The arms that once held their wives were now bound by God's decree. And so the women were left to face the ruins of what they helped create, alone, heartbroken, and haunted. Some of them collapsed under the weight of it all. Picture them standing on the barren post-flood landscape, looking out at a world washed clean, and knowing deep inside that they were part of the reason it happened. The guilt was crushing. Every uprooted tree, every lost soul, every child swallowed by the water, it all echoed back to their choice. The love that had once been so intoxicating now tasted like ash in their mouths. They fell to the ground, not in ritual, but in raw despair. Some screamed into the silence. Others whispered prayers, their voices broken with pain. They begged God for mercy, sobbing until their throats were raw and their eyes were dry. But was it enough? Could forgiveness find its way to a heart that had helped ignite the greatest judgment since the Garden of Eden? Can love really blind someone so completely that they invite a curse upon all creation? Even heaven watched in silence, because while the world had been cleansed, the story of these women was not over. What would become of them, the bearers of giants, the dancers with angels, the weepers at the edge of eternity? The answer would come not through a second flood, but through fire, because the Archangel Michael was not yet done with heaven's decree. But not every woman fell to her knees in sorrow. Not every heart broke under the weight of what had happened. Some, like the one known in lore as Nama, refused to bow. Ah, Nama. The name itself carries the sound of silk and fire. She had been celebrated for her beauty, her charm, her enchanting voice. Even the angels had noticed her above all others. But her beauty had become her weapon. Her pride had become her armor. And even after the flood washed away the world she helped to unravel, she remained standing, unrepentant. She wore her sins like a gown, not of shame, but of defiance. She had drunk from the cup of forbidden power, and she had liked the taste. She had used her charms not just to seduce the angels, but to lead other women down the same path. Even as heaven rained down fire in silence, she believed she had been right. Her pride had become her prison, a cage built not of bars but of mirrors that only reflected what she wanted to see. But God, whose justice sees through every mask, crafted a punishment that was not just fair, but poetic. They would not be turned into beasts, but into warnings, into sirens, into mermaids. Yes, the creatures of lore, half woman, half creature of the deep, cursed to live beneath the very waves that had brought the first judgment. Behind the fantasy lies the judgment. These women, once loved by angels and elevated above mortal men, were now cursed to forever embody the very danger they had embraced. They would still be beautiful, achingly so. Their voices would still be like music, their eyes like stars, but their beauty, now a curse, would only bring destruction. Just like the angels they had loved, they would now lure others into the same kind of fall. Can you imagine such a fate? To be forever desired but never truly loved. To be pursued but never cherished. To sing a song you cannot stop singing, knowing it will lead others to their doom. These were not the mermaids of fairy tales. These were cursed souls trapped between the wrath of heaven and the memory of earth. And the worst punishment of all wasn't the curse, it was the memory, the knowledge, the endless replay of the choices that led to the apocalypse. Their minds became battlefields. Some went mad, hearing the screams of the drowning every time they closed their eyes. Others became numb, hollowed-out shadows wandering in a wasteland of guilt, too deep for words. They tried to forget, but the sea would never let them, because the ocean, vast and unforgiving, became both their prison and their stage. It whispered their names, carried the echoes of their past, and reminded them day after day that they were no longer human, no longer lovers, no longer mothers. They were reminders, warnings, the living consequences of a love that crossed a sacred line. The Book of Jude alludes to such an eternal fate for those who abandon their proper place. They are wild waves of the sea, foaming up their shame, wandering stars for whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. What more fitting image could there be? And so Naama and the others wandered on, hidden in story, felt in the storms, heard in the lonely cry of the sea. And what of the fallen angels, shackled in their spiritual prisons, sealed away in the deepest darkness? Their bodies were bound, but their awareness was left wide open. That was part of the punishment. They were not spared the agony of the aftermath. In fact, they were forced to witness it. Every cry, every scream, every moment of the unraveling of the women they once loved, they felt it. Not just saw it, they felt it. The grief, the madness, the slow-motion shattering of a mind held captive by guilt. It wasn't just painful, it was an unspeakable torment. And they could do nothing, not whisper a word of comfort, not reach out, not even close their eyes. They had chosen rebellion, and this was their harvest. Meanwhile, the angels who had remained loyal, the ones who had refused to succumb to temptation, were given a new, solemn duty. No longer just messengers, no longer just warriors, they became the sentinels of a wounded earth, the guardians of a world that had tasted both the glory and the wrath of heaven. Their mission now was to ensure that such a defiance never took root again. From their new post, they watched everything. They watched the seas where the sirens still sang their haunting, beautiful, deadly songs. These sirens had once been their sisters-in-law, part of a forbidden family tree that heaven would never fully claim. The loyal angels did not interfere. They could not. But they listened, and they remembered. They also watched humanity rise cautiously from the ashes, heartbrokenly, one village, one garden at a time. The people tried to forget, but the memory of the flood lingered like smoke after a fire. Stories were passed from father to son, mother to daughter, of giants and angels and a sea that swallowed the earth. No one ever told the full truth, but no one ever fully let it go. It was a new chapter, a rebirth. The world was washed clean, but clean did not mean unscarred. The loyal angels, once so bold and radiant, now stood in quiet reverence. They had learned, they had seen, they had witnessed firsthand what happens when the divine ventures into human desire, and so now they kept their distance, not because they had stopped caring, but because they now understood the cost. They watched from the edge of glory, their hands clasped, their hearts guarded. Some lines are carved in eternity. Some boundaries are not just laws, they are warnings written into the fabric of the cosmos itself. And the angels remembered the lesson. A lesson soaked in rain, echoed in thunder, and etched in sorrow. No matter how beautiful the temptation, no matter how powerful the emotion, there are some places even an angel must never go. So now you know. The story didn't end with the flood. The world may have been washed clean, but its echoes still ripple through time. The sirens still sing. The fallen angels still grieve in their silent prisons. And heaven still watches, remembering the day that love turned to rebellion and rebellion turned to ruin. This story isn't just a piece of forgotten mythology or a warning buried in ancient texts. It's a mirror, a reminder that the choices we make, even those born from what we call love, carry consequences that can ripple far beyond ourselves. It asks us the same question those angels once ignored. What are you willing to give up for the pursuit of something forbidden? And what happens when it's too late to turn back? If this story moved you, if it made you feel something deep in your spirit, or revealed a truth you hadn't seen before, I invite you to comment 777 below to let us know you are awake and watching. Your voice matters here. Thank you to every single one of you who supports our channel through your likes, your shares, and your subscriptions. And a heartfelt thank you to those who have given through the super thanks. Your generosity helps us continue to share these truths with the world. But even if you have never given, know this: we are still grateful for your presence, your time, and your spirit. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who might need this story today. Let them know that the flood wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something much, much bigger. May you walk in wisdom, protected by truth, May you recognize the siren calls in your own life and have the strength to walk away. And may God bless you, keep you, and always remind you that some boundaries are sacred and some love is worth waiting for. Stay safe, stay faithful, and stay chosen.